Hello everyone, I'm George from Ireland. So this video is saying Ave at Bawale to Kenneth Kaunda, I hope I pronounced his surname correctly, the founding president of Zambia who died just yesterday. So this man who was born in what was then Northern Rhodesia, British colony, he was highly unusual in that both his parents were literate. And at that time in Zambia, as it later became, literacy was very low indeed. Literacy had been brought only a couple of generations earlier by British explorers and missionaries. So he's baptised in the Church of Scotland, and his father's a missionary for the Church of Scotland. That segment of the British Empire, the Scots were particularly prevalent. What we now call Zambia, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Tanzania, or Central Africa, they called those first three for a while. They're in the northwest frontier, i.e. a bit of what's now Pakistan. For some reason, I'm not quite sure, but the Church of Scotland was very active there, more so than other Christian denominations. So his parents were also teachers. He became a teacher himself, and he became attracted to radical notions, to Marxism and so on, and he travelled extensively. He didn't just work in what's now Zambia. In some other countries, he made contact with other budding nationalist leaders, and looked to the Indian independence movement with increasing admiration. There was the African National Congress, which was founded in South Africa, obviously modelled on the Indian National Congress, but the ANC existed not just in South Africa, spread through some of the then British colonies. He was briefly in that, and then he founded his UNIP, United National Independence Party, in the 1950s, agitating for a greater degree of self-government, going around delivering speeches. And I know someone who was actually in the colonial police then in the 1950s said we had to have recording equipment so we could prove if any people said anything seditious. And there was growing unrest. There's briefly been the Central African Federation, which is what we now call Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Malawi. Zambia, it did have an elected legislature, but so all whites were allowed to vote. Very few black people were allowed to vote. The number of black people were allowed to vote sort of increased and increased. And the white minority in what's now Zambia was tiny, it's perhaps 2% of the population. There are Indians as well, fewer than that. And there was a sort of parallel legal and political system for the black majority and various hereditary chieftains to be running affairs for the indigenous population. But when the two systems collided, the white one prevailed. Anyway, so Kenneth Kaunda, in some ways impressed by the Westminster model, saying, why can't we have these rights? Why only for whites? That's racialist, that's unfair. We ought to be able to determine our own future. India's ploughing its own furrow, and that's better for them. And the whites, unsurprisingly, are going to care about themselves and do what's in their own best interests, even if that redounds to the disadvantage of the black majority, which is, of course, an overwhelming majority. He studied at Copperbelt University briefly, I seem to remember it was in Ndola, in the northern part of Zambia, very close to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Anyway, so he's briefly imprisoned for sedition, but then released, and he led the country to independence in 1962. Of course, the Belgian Congo, as it was, which was adjacent to Zambia, had got independence just beforehand, and so that country collapsed into wild disorder, and there was an awful lot of bloodletting. A lot of the Belgian civilians fled. Some of them closest to Zambia fled into Zambia. The white minority in Zambia and Zimbabwe, Rhodesia as it then was, were very worried about this and said, well, we can't possibly have majority rule because that would be cataclysmic for us. But anyway, that Central African Federation broke up because the white minority in Zimbabwe was the largest white minority of those three countries, didn't want its strength diluted by being connected to countries with such an overwhelming black majority, such as Malawi and Zambia. So anyway, Zambia became independent in 1962, if I got that right. And of course, so he led them to independence. Kenneth Kaunda, as Prime Minister, quickly made it a one-party state and ruled on that way for quite some time. Now, he was, I suppose, a dictator, one of the least brutal dictators around. And there was a somewhat free press, but the parameters in which his opinion could be expressed narrowed ever more. And so student protesters regularly beaten up. I'm not aware that anybody was killed, actually. So he believed in socialism and a centrally planned economy, And he did succeed in spreading literacy. You've got to give him credit where it's due. And yes, the country did develop as more people got electricity and running water, but in some ways ran the country into the ground. But there was stability and continuity in governance, at least. So he played host to Joshua Nkomo's Zimbabwean African People's Union, that political party, and his armed wing, the Zimbabwean People's Revolutionary Army, who was Chinese aligned, who were then attacking into Zimbabwe, then southern Rhodesia, which was under the mastery of the white minority. Of course, the Rhodesian armed forces hit back, not attacking the Zambian armed forces as such, but KK, he took a bit of a risk. It was a front line state without actually declaring war on Rhodesia, which maybe he should have done. But then that would really raise the stakes, and more of his infrastructure would have been bombed. So eventually, helping to achieve success for the Zimbabwean independence movement and majority rule there in 1979. So he's very well known in the Organisation of African Unity, attended Commonwealth conferences and so on. So he seemed genteel. He had this plausible, respectability to him. A beatific smile, which lit up the room. A soft manner. He was unfailingly courteous. But by the late 80s, things were going very badly wrong. HIV began to spread like wildfire. I mean, I know he wasn't spreading it, but you've got to do more in terms of public information and whatever healthcare to prevent this pandemic spreading in the country. And the public services were being underfunded. Some of his officials and politicians were peculating from the public exchequer. There was terrible inflation. The kwacha was losing so much value, and things like that. So there was growing penury. His close relationship with communist states was not redounding to the advantage of the public. And then he had a distressingly cordial relationship with Saddam Hussein, who was the genocidal tyrant of Iraq. Now, there was Daphne Parish, his British nurse, who was accused of espionage there. And her friend, Farzad Bastov, was hanged in Iraq, almost innocently, we now know. The man who even presided over Farzad Bastov's court-martial subsequently said, "I knew this man was innocent. I'd been ordered to convict him, so I did. Or else it would be my neck in the noose." But so Kaunda, he used his good offices to persuade Saddam Hussein not only to spare Daphne Parish's life, but actually to set her at liberty. And she did. So I thank Kenneth Kaunda for that. He did use his influence for a humanitarian purpose. He even named a street in Lusaka in honour of Saddam Hussein, which is horrific to name it in honour of someone who really was just so monstrous on such an enormous scale. So there were mass protests against Kenneth Kaunda, and he was forced from office in 1991 because prices of basic commodities had just gone through the roof. So there was a widespread hardship, and to some extent caused by defalcation from the public purse by some of his cronies. So he lived out in a comfortable retirement the rest of his life in Zambia. His son tried to enter the political forum, didn't get anywhere, and UNIPE was no longer a major party. It moved on. So Kenneth Kaunda, yes, he did some good. He wasn't democratic because it was a one-party state for a long time. He wasn't particularly cruel, and he did achieve a few things well. Will he be missed? A little bit. He wasn't terrible. Could have been a lot better, really. I think Botswana's had some of the best leadership in that region in Africa. So please subscribe to my channel. Toodaloo.